The perpetrator, he lacked grounds for asylum, but he was allowed to stay on the watch of the Social Democrats, funded by taxpayers. He committed crimes in Sweden, but he was allowed to stay on the Social Democrats' watch. We should send him home, and everyone that lacks grounds for asylum must be sent home from Western Europe. And we have to have a net minus in terms of migration if we are ever going to solve this problem that the utopians have given to us and our children and grandchildren of segregation.
Authorities claim 8 people were injured when a man went on a mass stabbing rampage in the Swedish city of Vetlanda, attacking random pedestrians with an axe. The assailant, an Afghan man in his 20s, was shot and detained by the law enforcement. Police are treating the case as attempted murder, but also investigating the possibility of terror motives. Here to talk with us about it is a Swedish politician and member of the European Parliament, Mr. Charlie Weimers. Mr. Weimers is a member of Sweden Democrats and part of ECR group. Good evening, Mr. Weimers.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Weimers, what's your take on the thing that happened in Sweden yesterday? We do not, we seem not to have too many information on the details of this horrifying event.
No, I mean, what happened in Vetlanda was truly terrifying. 7 innocent persons attacked and stabbed. And of course, our thoughts and prayers are with the victims, their families, and everyone affected, the whole community. 3 victims, I just heard, are currently in critical condition, so extra prayers to those that they actually make it. We still know very little about the motive of the perpetrator, but the police is currently leading the investigation, but the security service follows it in case it would turn out to be a matter of terrorism. But the fact that this took place in a small town of only 13,000 inhabitants reminds us of how vulnerable our society is. Breaks my heart to say this about my beloved Sweden, but this is not the country I grew up in.
Well, our thoughts and prayers go to all the affected, all the members of the families. It's as you mentioned, indeed a terrifying event, but we still do not know much, at least from the information that were published by the media yesterday and today. We know that the police might have known the suspected terrorists or the men who attacked those people. Do we know what was the nature of this knowledge of the police about the perpetrator?
Yes, we do know the name. His name is Tamim Sultani, citizen of Afghanistan. He is, according to the population register, 22 years old, came to Sweden in 2016, previously convicted of drug offenses. He's a resident of Vetlanda, and he's currently awaiting notification of a new residence permit since his previous one expired in November 2020.
So Weimers, it's hard not to ask questions about the European migration policy each time we see this kind of events, and we see it all over the Europe. You mentioned that your beloved Sweden is not the country that you used to grow up in. What are the reasons, in your opinion, for Europe to be running this kind of migration policy that we see for many years now?
Well, I think it's based upon utopian thinking. The conviction that everything will be fine in the end. And this is the difference you see between I think Western and Central Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, we are so unacquainted with the idea of things going terribly wrong that we cannot even imagine that happening. While Poles, for instance, know that your country can disappear on the map, albeit not your nation that, thank God, survived. Hungarians understand that countries can be occupied by Ottomans as well as Russians. You understand it very well too. But Swedes and Western Europeans have forgotten this historical lesson. So they cling on to their utopian beliefs that everything will be good in the end. I think that is the major error behind this. Then you also have what the philosopher, conservative philosopher Roger Scruton termed oikophobia. A quite large portion of academics, media, culture that hates our civilization, that doesn't really care about the future of our civilization. That's oikophobia, the hate of your own home. And we as conservatives should challenge that with oikophilia, with love of our home. And then we should draw the right conclusions out of this failed experiment that liberals and socialists have been pursuing for 40 years, that they want to export to countries like yours, multiculturalism, mass migration. And we should draw the right conclusions out of this event today. The perpetrator, he lacked grounds for asylum, but he was allowed to stay on the watch of the Social Democrats, funded by taxpayers. He committed crimes in Sweden, but he was allowed to stay on the Social Democrats' watch. We should send him home, and everyone that lacks grounds for asylum must be sent home from Western Europe. And we have to have a net minus in terms of migration if we are ever going to solve this problem that the utopians have given to us and our children and grandchildren of segregation.
It seems that we are having another problem here in terms of the European Union as a community of sovereign countries. We have a problem, at least it looks like this, of a kind of political correctness which doesn't allow us very often to ask obvious questions that you just raised. Is there also a question of dispute that is taking place right now in Europe on one hand, maybe in our countries respectively on the other?
Yeah, I mean, in Sweden currently there is a big debate on a statement that my party chairman Jimmie Åkesson did 1 week ago, where he said that there must be a stop to any migration that puts a cultural, financial, and social strain on Sweden. And then our opponents, liberals and socialists, went ballistic over that statement. Why? Because they accused him of naming every migrant a cultural, social, and financial strain, which he was not doing. They were just pretending to misunderstand him. They are not as dumb as to not understand what he meant. What he meant was that certain migration will lead to increased honor violence, honor culture, as from the Middle East and North Africa. It will lead to bigger unemployment because certain individuals come without any education and cannot get a job in Sweden. Certain migration will increase Islamism, for instance. But our opponents cannot admit that openly because of political correctness. So they attack Jimmie Åkesson for being a xenophobe. And as long as our political leaders pretend not to understand the problem, we will see an increasing vulnerability to act heinous acts like the one we saw in Vetlanda. Swedes are going to have to grapple with the fact that it's not a matter of if, but when the next terror attack will occur. And that's utterly unacceptable, and that's why we need a new government in 2022, and that's why Central and Eastern Europe would do better in rejecting the Swedish model on migration.
Mr. Weimers, there's also another political question. It is not directly related to this horrifying event itself, but in a wider manner certainly is. It is a conflict between European People's Party and Hungarian Fidesz. We are going to talk on our show later on this issue, but I'm interested on your take on the reasons why the Hungarian ruling party decided to split its ways with the biggest fraction of the political group of European Parliament. We got 1 minute.
I think migration is a big reason why. The EPP wants to make a grand coalition decision on migration with the Social Democrats and the Liberals, and I think that has put a strain on the relationship between Fidesz and the EPP. And I also think that the federalist strand of the EPP has been a matter of dispute between Fidesz and the majority of the EPP for many, many years. And of course, there has been a campaign by Nordic, Baltic EPP members to have them expelled from the group. And eventually, I think that Germans and others have started listening to those demands and decided that they will pick the side of the Nordics rather than of Fidesz.
Charlie Weimers, member of European Parliament from Sweden, was our guest. Thank you for your time and thank you for your presence on Rock Rachon. See you next time.
Thank you. Till next time.